What's up, YouTube? Thanks for tuning back into Chase Games here. And today, this is, again, another new player thing. And something that has occurred to me is that a lot of players, especially myself, will casually refer to things as breath damage, martial damage, physical damage. And that probably doesn't mean a damn thing to you noobs, okay? So let's just talk about the different damage types here. And lately I've been talking about breath, and when I denote that something is breath damage, that's actually a positive, and I'm going to explain why. So let's talk about the four different damage types, okay? You know what, let me do this. No, I'm not going to start the video over. Screw you guys. Okay, we got physical. Okay, physical is a damage type. It's also, no surprise here, the type that your basic attack is a physical attack. I don't believe there's any exceptions to that. There is at least one unit, Young Terry. His basic attack is actually ranged, but it's still physical, and it's weak as crap. Okay. Physical, okay. Can crit, can miss, okay. Scales off, is that the right way to say it? Scales off strength. I can't remember if they call it strength or attack in this game. Yeah. Anywho. Yeah, that goes off your strength or attack stat. Okay, sorry, let me not be a scrub. Strength or attack? I forget. It's been so long since I had to care. It's attack. Okay. Yeah. Alright, let's be proper. Scales off attack. Okay. Physical is really common. For the longest time in the game, this was the best damage type because they started making physical units really good while not making martial very good. Spell damage was really falling off. It had some really inherent problems that's when things were scaling up, they literally didn't improve. And then breath, there just wasn't a whole lot of breath damage, and it was all fairly weak, so nobody cared about anything. It was all about physical. And also, since it scales off attack, for quite a while in the game, attack was literally the only thing. You could buff attack and you could buff defense. That was about it. After a little bit while, there was very, very few ways to buff wisdom. I don't think buffing wisdom is as good as buffing attack, though. But anyway, yeah, it's physical was just like king for a while. And then evasion units became a thing, and they started making the other damage types stronger, so there you go. So here's the thing. So physical, it can crit, it can miss, and it's easy to buff. Those are the perks, and those are the pros and cons of physical. Well, then you have martial. By the way, if you ever mess around with Google Translate looking at JP stuff, they will call martial... Google Translate is like physical or something like that. It's Google Translate translates physical and martial the same way, so you're gonna have to figure out other things to look for to tell. Basically, if there's a percent potency modifier, it's physical. If there isn't, it's martial. Okay, generally. So martial, it can miss, it can crit, and it scales off level, which you can't really change. So yeah, its damage is pretty much static. There are very, very, very few ways to buff martial damage. Specifically, you do have units like Young Terry that can... There's a lot more buff options now, but they're limited. So you can just buff straight up damage with something like Young Terry, but you know, that's a whole unit that's coming in devoted to doing that. So there are some units that buff their own martial, but as far as, you know, being as easy to buff as attack, not even close. So basically your martial units just don't get buffed, other than a strategy where you're using Young Terry. So yeah, like I said, you can't, your equipment isn't going to matter, other than if you have modifiers for it on weapons and equipment and whatnot. So yeah, buffing your stats themselves aren't going to change its damage. But you know, some of the newer martial units do a lot of damage. Back in the day, they all just did bad damage, so there was a bad type. But keep in mind, this is another one that can miss. Okay, let's look at spell. Okay, can miss. Okay, can crit. I'm pretty sure martial can crit. It could be martial crits. I'm pretty sure. And it scales off wisdom. Now, the nice thing, first of all, this is basically inherent to spell damage. It's usually ranged. In the beginning of the game, that was basically not a thing physical did. Now physical has... There's a lot of ranged physical attacks, and a lot of them are much better than a lot of spells. Although they're finally starting to catch up. In the beginning of the game, when you were relying on units with B rank spells, they were wisdom capped very low. So they literally stopped mattering months into the game at all. They were crap. Now A rank abilities, A rank spells still have a wisdom cap, but from what I understand, they're all high enough that you have no fear of even approaching them. Okay. So, oh, sorry. Sorry. Spell cannot miss. That's the thing. It can't miss. Spells cannot miss. They can crit. Okay. And they go off wisdom, although I mentioned this before, their scaling is a little bit different. Spell modifiers are the damage calculation on spells a bit different than physical. So buffing wisdom isn't as good as buffing attack, I'm fairly certain. But you know, you can put more wisdom on something and get more spell damage, as well as other modifiers, just like everything else. You know, there's modifiers for certain moves, certain elements. I almost said elephants. That would have been crazy. So spell's a really good type. The only thing, there are a few units that have spell reflect shields, but they're few and far between. And then you know when you're going to face units that have that. In PvP, you know those units. In PvE, you know what those units are going to be too. So you just don't bring a spellcaster generally. I believe there's only 2 exceptions right now. No, 3. Just one is irrelevant. There are a handful of spells. Yeah. That are they call it unreflectable spell damage. Okay. Yeah, and also, between Erdrick and Sorrow, they both do the same thing. They both have the same thing. They have spells that work off attack. They are obviously the exception, not the rule. It scales off wisdom normally, so, they just had to give these guys even more broken abilities, because, balance. So, and then, right now, basically, I just needed to explain why breath is valued right now, okay? It can't miss. It can't crit, okay? And it scales off level. So, at first glance, you're like, oh, so it's martial, but yeah. So yeah, it's going to do, it's basically, it's very similar to martial in that it scales off level. But being able to not miss instead of not crit, you don't want to put crits into consideration, okay? When you're looking at like PvE, or PvP especially, or when you're trying to do like PvE, you don't want to be relying on crits almost ever, okay? So trading off the ability to crit for the ability to never miss, that's huge. Missing an attack sucks, especially since, sometimes your ability to connect is related to your agility score as well. I don't know what the numbers look like, but a slow unit trying to attack a fast unit will miss more often. A fast unit attacking a slow unit, gonna hit basically all the time, okay? So if you've got slow martial units, they're gonna miss somewhat often, okay? Breath units, no matter what their speed are, they're not gonna miss, okay? And once again, in the first year of the game or so, their damage not very good. Well, especially the first 6 months. Dimension Dragon kind of switched things up, but he was a little bit overhyped. Good again, though, with his Blossom. But yeah, they've increased breath damage a lot, okay? So it depends unit to unit, but this is why when I denote that something is breath damage, especially in the current meta, okay, I mentioned that there are units with evasion, okay, that 100% evade units with physical and martial attacks. Spell and breath do not suffer from that, so when you see dual Maguses running around, when you see Fallen Angel Corvuses running around, even though it's not 100% evasion, you've got Elena, Sagittar, the female A from DQ10, Mal. There's a couple others. Anything with evasion, Sorrow gets evasion. Okay, these guys don't. The breath damage doesn't care. It's going to hit you every time. There is going to be a unit in a couple of months that has breath evasion for 3 turns, but disregard that for now. Okay, so right now, breath is the best damage type. It's not always the most damaging, but being breath is a big hit. Okay, and then lastly, let's just we'll talk about elements real quick, and I guess resistances, status ailment, and whatnot. All right, so there are, for the longest time, I just assumed that there were 8 damage types. It's actually 7, although you can count 8 as the non-elemental, typeless damage, which is relevant sometimes. Typeless is never bad. And then if you're running into something like, there are very few units that resist all elements, but not typeless. So sometimes you need to deal typeless damage. This guy's weak to Frizz and Zam, so he will take 50% extra damage from Frizz and Zam attacks, okay? But when he's hit with Crack or Bang, he will take less. Okay, so this guy is only awakened 1, so he'll take 25% less. Every unit that has 2 resistances, which is 99% of them, when you hit the second awakening, okay, you'll get one of them up to half resistance, so instead of a 25% reduction, it'll be 50, and 4th awakening will get you the other one. So a lot of times if you're farming units, every once in a while you might find a strategy that uses a B or a C or even an A rank unit where you don't really need them to be at 5, but often you need them to be at 4 because they're in that guide because they have the right resistances. Although that's mostly like a year 1 thing. There's such a large unit pool now, but we generally don't have to go to lower rank things, but hey, sometimes there's points. So anyway, yeah. I think that's about it with there. So, and again, you'll hear people talking about the meta, like, right now Frizz is pretty good because there's a lot of units that are weak to Frizz. So when there are a lot of units running around with Frizz attacks, a unit that is resistant to Frizz could have extra value. So, and right now, I mean, his resistances are Crack and Bang. I think it'll change when Zoma gets blossomed, but right now, Crack is not really something to be that worried about. Well, Zenlon will change that too. This week, today, Crack resistance is not good. Okay, so that's a small weakness. And resistant to Bang. A lot of things are resistant to Bang, and a lot of things are weak to Bang right now. It feels like it's either or. For most things, it's a very common element to resist or be weak to. So, in 2 weeks, these are going to be better resistances than they are now. So again, the meta can really define that. Being weak to Zam is actually a good thing because the only thing that's doing Zam damage right now is Durin and Hargan, and I don't think they're very widespread yet. Okay, so nobody has Durin. That might be Wales only, and they're probably not using Durin. I don't think they like them. So yeah, it's basically just Hargan, and he's a 65-point unit, so that's a lot. You're not going to see him a lot, possibly. Now, and then all these resistances. I made another video about all the resistances, but just note that when something is super weak to a status ailment, it has a double chance of being applied. Half resistance, I believe, makes him 50% less likely to be hit to it. I don't know if it's 25% or 50. I would assume 50. And then immune does mean immune, okay? There's one exception, and it's not a thing anymore. I shouldn't even bring it up. There is a leader skill on an old unit that used to be really good that will lower an enemy's poison resistance. So he could actually take something that was immune to poison, because immune just means negative 100% efficiency, okay? So he will take that 100% resistance and lower it to 50, so you could actually poison something that was supposed to be immune to poison. Now, as far as PvE units, okay, they just have perks that say you can't poison them now, so it's different. You can't poison them at all, but yeah, that's the one thing. I don't think there's anything like that for example, paralysis. I don't think anything lowers paralysis resistance, and if it is, that's very slight. So yeah, sometimes a unit's weaknesses, ailment resistances can be important too. Not necessarily for Erdrick though, because he's immune to everything for 3 turns, but for example, Sorrow. Sorrow was a beast, and he's very, very hard to take down in one attack. But if you have an attack that has at least a 50% chance to paralyze him, Sorrow is weak to paralysis. So if you have a 50% chance to paralyze him, it will be 100. It is a 100% chance to paralyze Sorrow if the ability has at least a 50%. So that would be 40 for occasional plus 10. So basically it has to be a non-damaging ability that you've leveled to 10, okay, with few exceptions. So that's it. That's damage types. That's resistances elements. So hopefully I went over this in a concise, not too roundabout, rambling way. Yeah. So once again, I want to thank my patrons, Nick, Brandon, and Adam, I believe it is, and Retro Revolutions. Thank you guys. If you want to support the channel, if you want to keep seeing content, more content, etc., patreon.com/chasegames. Link is in the description, as well as the Discord. If you have more questions about this subject or any of your stupid new player questions, join my Discord. I made a thread just for you guys. It's called Stupid Noob Questions. I have a sense of humor, guys. Don't be offended. Anyway, the best advice I can give to new players: join a Discord, ask some questions. Okay. Good luck, guys. I'll be back with more soon.